What's up, Facebook family? Pastor Batson here with a brief word to the world in times like these. So I want to share. A brief story. I'm not going to read it. I just want to kind of summarize it. But it's found in Luke chapter 10. It's a story that we call the Good Samaritan. It's a story where a gentleman, was really trying to justify his actions, and so he began to ask, Jesus questions about who his neighbor is, and so Jesus began to share a parable, a story of a man who was on his way down from Jericho to Jerusalem, from Jerusalem to Jericho, one way or the other. But he was beat up by some thieves, and he was left on the side of the road. He was left there to die. And the goat talks about how this priest walked by and just kind of left him there. Then this, keeper of the law walked by, and they walked by, left him there. But then this third guy comes by, a Samaritan, and he stops. He pours oil and wine on his bandages. He bandaged his wounds. He put him on his own donkey. He took him to a hotel, to an inn. He put him in the bed. He said, listen, he went to the front desk. He said, listen, whatever he needs, I'll come back and pay the bill. Just make sure you take care of him, right? And so then Jesus asked this man a question. He says, now, you tell me, of the three people who encountered him, which one of those three is his neighbor? And of course, this young man said, well, it's the one who took him in. It's the one who, paid for his room. It's the one who, put the bandages on him. It's that one. And Jesus said, you're absolutely right. Now you go and do likewise. And that story, while has many, many lessons in it, I think there are at least two or three things that Jesus is trying to teach those of us who claim to be Christians about how we ought to have compassion one for another. The first thing that we learn, I think, is just not to judge a book by its cover. Because if you had to guess and say, which one of these guys do you think stopped to help this beat up man by the roadside, we probably would have said maybe the priest, or we would have said the other well-dressed, the lawyer, we would have thought that somebody who was, a keeper of the law, somebody who was a theologian, a preacher. We would have assumed not some Samaritan who, were considered, lesser. They were mixed breed. They were not a pure race of people. They kind of had it bad. They had a bad name, not because they had done anything bad, simply because of their culture. And so what happens is we tend to judge a book by its cover. Be careful about how much energy you put into a book simply by its cover without actually getting to understand the content of that book. How many times have we missed out on a great friendship, missed out on a husband or a wife simply because of cover? Y'all, it is a terrible way to go. We absolutely shouldn't judge a book by its cover. But the second thing you learn here is that in order to be selfless, this word selfless, selfless means to put others before yourself. And that means putting aside your differences. When it came to these differences, this Samaritan had some legit differences. He had some cultural differences. The Jews were, associated on one side and the Samaritans on the other side, and they didn't have a whole lot of dealings together. So there were some cultural differences that he had to overcome. But then there was also some financial differences, because on the one hand, the Jewish man was more affluent, and this Samaritan came from a maybe not so affluent place, but he was willing to take his few resources and put those resources towards helping somebody else have a better life. Somebody who didn't look like him, somebody who didn't think like him, somebody who didn't act like him, somebody who wasn't him. He was willing to conquer the cultural, even the financial barriers to make sure that somebody had compassion. What did he do? The first thing that he did was he stopped. Can I just tell you that sometimes compassion and sometimes the most selfless act that we can do is just to stop. When others are passing by, when others are ignoring situations, the first thing you can do is just stop. But then he poured oil and wine. He gave him medicine. And then he bandaged his wounds. That means he protected him from further damaging, from further being injured or infection setting in. So he put forth an effort. He stopped and he just put forth some effort. But I love this part. This is again how he was selfless, because then he put him on his own donkey. That means he had to walk while somebody else rode. Let me just tell you something. Sometimes the most selfless thing that we can do is let somebody else ride on top when we're walking on the bottom. It doesn't always have to be a grand gesture of tens of thousands of dollars. Sometimes just stopping, paying attention to somebody, giving them the attention that they need, and then allowing them to ride while you put in a little work. That's sometimes all the selfless act that we need to turn the entire situation around. But the last thing he did was that he paid it forward. And whatever else we ought to learn in this season, that sometimes the most concrete expression of love is this thing called compassion. That we've got to have compassion one for another. And he paid it for it. He went down to the front desk. He said, listen, my man is upstairs or he's in the room. Listen, whatever he needs, take care of him. I promise I'm coming back. I'm going to put this money down right here. This is going to take care of him for a while, but I'm going to come back. And to make sure that he has what he needs, you just make sure you continue to take good care of him. I'll be back to pay the rest of his bill. Isn't that something? Wouldn't that be something? If somebody just took care of you like that, couldn't you appreciate that kind of expression of compassion? Listen, we're living in a season where we need people to be more compassionate. We need people to be more generous, more selfless with themselves, more selfless with their resources, more selfless with their time, more selfless with their ability to help somebody who in this season can't help themselves. That's why one of the reasons why I insist that our church continues to do and continues to work and continues to push out resources. Now, we don't gather, and we don't gather in more than 10 people, but we're doing all that we can to continue to serve our community. Why? Because that's the model that Christ gave. That we must have compassion. We've got to serve. We've got to pour wine and oil on people's wounds. How can we do that? Sometimes that's just with prayer. Sometimes it's just meeting a practical need, like giving diapers or some snacks or some cereal or toilet paper, like we've done this week. Whatever it takes. Those are some small ways to exercise compassion and to show that God is still on the throne. Sometimes you gotta let people ride while you walk. That's just a simple way to show compassion. Listen, until tomorrow, my friends, I'll see you next time. Peace.